You know, Dr. Ray, gospel music is in and of itself so rich and full and powerful, but when you give it 100+ voices, it's just incredible.
It is, and that was my wife Sylvia singing the solo. Most gospel music has lead singers with it, and very excited to have had her with me for the entire 15 years that I've worked with the orchestra.
I was interested in looking at your face as you were listening to that. What is your thought process when you hear your own work? Not to mention your wife singing so beautifully.
It's a lot of memories, a lot of wonderful opportunities that have happened over this particular 15-year period. But then over my lifetime, from the time that I wrote this music and the acceptance of my music around the world, of hearing choirs in France, hearing choirs in Germany, choirs in Italy, traveling to those countries, and hearing your music performed in all of those different settings. It's very gratifying. I'm just grateful to God for Him having given me that gift to be able to write music that the world has appreciated and accepted in such a wonderful way.
Well, can the French perform American gospel music as well as we can?
You know, I'm going to say yes, but in their own way. There's some working with them on some rhythmic things. Sometimes is a challenge, you know, because many of them don't do those subtleties of syncopations and rhythm. So we, in the workshop process that I do in preparing a work like that, we work on training them to do certain kinds of rhythms and get a better feel for the music. But yes, we've done. They have a wonderful feel, wonderful expression. Music does have a kind of universal quality about it, and so that in their own way, they do wonderful jobs with the music.
When you have a little more time on your hands after the In Unison gig is over, will you be composing more?
I want to. That's my goal. Two things I want to happen. One thing, I want to get all of my older works on recordings. I don't have really definitive versions, professional recordings of a lot of my things. I've got a lot of wonderful tapes and a lot of wonderful things, live performances, but I think I'm going to need to go into the studio and maybe do some actual recording sessions on my own music. So that's one thing I want to do, and then certainly begin the writing process. The goal was to set all of the major liturgical texts in a gospel style. So I started with the Mass. I then wrote a Magnificat setting that's in a gospel style. 2.5 years ago, my mother passed away, and I wrote a Requiem setting that uses gospel style. So I want that to continue that process. I want to set a Te Deum, for instance, a gospel Te Deum, using what I know now even more about gospel music in terms of style and new harmonizations and new things that have happened since I wrote the Gospel Mass, and begin to incorporate some of that into a work also.
Your own faith has played a big part in all of this, has it not?
It has. Yeah. It has. Grew up in St. Louis and pretty much grew up in the AME Church. St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church is a church that I tell everybody all over the world that gave me my beginnings, that gave me my roots. I appeared on stage at the Powell on stage concert last evening, and we talked about the fact that growing up in St. Louis was a wonderful experience, and my experience of learning the African American style, not in an academic setting, but learning it firsthand in church and playing for the gospel choir there and doing things at St. Paul. I took that with me everywhere I went. And so when I went to the University of Illinois and founded the Black Student Choir there that just celebrated a 40-year anniversary, we took that same experience that I brought from the church, and with all of course, my academicness, all my collegiateness, if you will, and we took all of that with us. But it all began right there at the St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church.
How long did it take, and perhaps you don't know the answer to this question, but I'd be curious as to when it happened that African American musicians, performers, were performing at Powell Hall? You have any idea?
To be honest, I don't. I know that when I was growing up in St. Louis, the Venerable Kenneth Billups was doing just incredible. So we're talking, I was born in 46, so let's talk the 50s and 60s. I do know that African Americans were doing a lot of things on stage at Powell. Dr. Billups, as a matter of fact, I don't think many people know, but the incredible work Carmina Burana, that's just one of the staples of every symphony chorus repertoire now. But when we look at the history of St. Louis and the symphony, the very first performance of Carmina was prepared by Dr. Kenneth Billups, the Sumner High School Choir, the Legend Singers. And so when those of us that know that work and know how difficult it is, know that that was just a yeoman's task even back then. So we can say as early as 1950, we know that there was a lot of activity with Dr. Billups and people performing. Beyond that, I'm not sure.
You know, it was my pleasure to know Ken Billups
Mm-hmm.
years ago, and he was doing some things at Channel 2, and I was there. And he was a giant of a man in more ways than one, and your mentor.
He was, absolutely. As I look back on my years of working in St. Louis, the church provided me with one area of inspiration, but Dr. Billups was also a major inspiration. He was the reason that, first of all, that I went to Northwestern University, because he attended Northwestern University. He and Helen Louise Graves, the then director of the city school system, they both wanted me to go to Northwestern, the school that they went to. And so, and again, seeing Dr. Billups as the role model of conducting symphony orchestras and preparing incredible performances around the city was an inspiration to me. And playing under him, he was a taskmaster. He took no stuff, and playing for him was a real professional experience, because he would, I mean, if you played wrong notes, he would call you out right then and there on the spot and embarrass you. So the pressure was on to play perfectly all the time.
See, that belies my impression of him, because he was a big fellow who moved kind of slowly and seemed like a very gentle man.
Yeah, but in rehearsal, he was a monster. He was a monster. And again, it's that professional standard that we learned in high school under people like him. And it took us well into our collegiate levels, and it still carries us into the work that I do with the In Unison Chorus now. I'm constantly referring a lot to the things that Dr. Billups did and what he taught us in terms of the sound production, how to produce the tones, and just he was just an inspiration to the entire community.
Well, someday, if not already, people will be saying the same thing about you.
Well, thank you, man.
We have something else that we'd like to listen to now, and this is Rollo Dilsworth's Freedom Plow, at least an excerpt of it. And once again, I would ask you to just tell us a little bit about this piece, and then we'll play that excerpt.
Okay, well, again, Rollo was here with the premiere with Maestro Robertson back at the beginning of the season, and he was a student here at the university, and we worked with him for a semester or two on composition while he was here. And so it was just, of course, very gratifying for me to have the symphony commission a work from a former student of mine. And for this concert, it kind of helps bring a lot of my work full circle, because I then see a work that I'm actually able to conduct. Maestro Robertson did the premiere, but he very graciously allowed me to repeat the work again, and allowing me to conduct it, and allows me to conduct my students' work in my final concert, which is going to be special for me.
Unfortunately, again, we can't hear it all, but we can invite people to Powell Hall tonight to hear it.
Come on down.
Is there anything you should tell us about the segment that we are going to hear?
Yes, we're going to hear the sort of the ending segment, and it's a wonderful text that Rollo has taken from Langston Hughes, and he takes that text and incorporates the spiritual "hold on, keep your hand on the plow, hold on," and he talks about the plow being that all-important freeing experience for all of us. And so at the very end, he throws in a little gospel feel, too, with my wife, Sylvia, again, doing some ad-libbing and improvising. So you're going to hear some of the formal part, and then you're going to hear the sort of slightly freer part at the very end.
Let's listen.